On the night after the incident with the police officers, the house was silent, with a palpable tension in the air. Emily had gone to bed early, emotionally exhausted by the day's events. Michael found Jennifer sitting on the porch, a shawl draped over her shoulders despite the mild evening. Her eyes were fixed on the distant city lights, but her gaze seemed turned inward, lost in painful thoughts. "Are you okay?" he asked, hesitating at the door. Jennifer let out a deep sigh before answering. "How could I have been so blind, Michael?" Her voice was heavy with self-condemnation. All these years he was manipulating everything, and I just accepted it. Michael sat in the chair beside her, respecting the space between them. "Don't blame yourself. People like Richard are masters of manipulation. They build their lies so carefully that it's almost impossible to tell the truth from the fiction. But I'm her mother. I should have protected our daughter better." Jennifer turned to face him, tears now streaming freely down her face. "And you? I accused you of so many things in my mind. I thought you didn't care, that you had moved on, forgotten about us." Michael shook his head, an old sadness reflected in his eyes. "There wasn't a single day I didn't think about her, about both of you, really." The silence that followed was heavy, not with awkwardness, but with shared grief for the lost time, for the memories that could have been made but never were. "How did you meet Richard?" Michael finally asked, trying to piece together the missing parts of the puzzle. Jennifer adjusted her shawl as if seeking physical protection against painful memories. "It was shortly after we moved to Austin. I was working at a private school and Emily had just started first grade. Richard was the father of one of the students, a recent widower." She paused, a bitter smile on her lips. "He seemed so kind. At first so concerned about his son, so different from the other men I'd met after you." Michael listened carefully, recognizing the slow, patient setup of a trap in Jennifer's story. "He helped us when we had problems with the apartment. We'd rented, used his connections to find us a better place at an affordable price. We started seeing each other more, and he always included Emily in our plans. She was only 8, still talked about you all the time, asked when you'd come back to see her." Jennifer paused, her voice breaking as she continued. "Richard said he was in touch with you. He even showed me messages on his phone, which I now realize must have been fake. He said you were always busy, that you'd started a new family, that—" She hesitated. "That you'd asked him to take care of us because you couldn't anymore." Michael felt a wave of anger rise inside him, but he controlled it. Anger wouldn't help anyone now. "After we got married, things changed gradually. He became more controlling, more critical. He isolated me from old friends, monitored my spending, my time. It was so subtle I barely noticed. By the time I realized what was happening, I already felt so trapped, so dependent." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "And Emily? Poor thing, suffered under his behavior. He was never physically violent, but his psychological manipulation was constant. He criticized everything she did, compared her to other girls, made her feel like she wasn't good enough, smart enough, pretty enough." Michael's heart ached at the thought of his daughter, so vibrant and confident as a child, enduring that kind of treatment. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" "I tried once when Emily was 12. Jennifer looked directly at Michael, willing him to understand. "He threatened to take away my custody, said he had proof that I was unstable, that he had judge friends who would make sure I'd never see her again. At the time I believed him. Only later did I realize it was just another one of his manipulations, but the fear had already taken root." She shook her head. "It wasn't until Emily turned 17 that I finally found the courage. I filed for divorce and started planning our move back to North Carolina. And that's when she disappeared," Michael finished, the pieces falling into place. Jennifer nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. 2 months ago. She left for school and never came back. The police—" Her voice faltered. "They didn't take it seriously. Suggested she'd run away voluntarily, that it was common for teenagers with family issues. Richard pushed that theory, said she was probably upset about the divorce. He even showed some messages on her phone that suggested it, messages I later found out he'd sent himself using her phone. Michael clenched his fists, imagining Jennifer's despair, alone, not knowing where her daughter was, facing the indifference of the authorities and the manipulations of her ex-husband. "How did you survive this?" Jennifer looked at him, her expression softening for the first time. "Because of her, because of Emily. Deep in my heart, I knew she hadn't run away. Our daughter wouldn't do that to me, no matter what Richard said, so I kept looking, even when everyone told me to give up." The use of our daughter didn't escape Michael. It was the first time in years Jennifer had acknowledged his fatherhood, not just as a biological fact, but as an emotional bond that had endured despite distance and time. "And now she's here," Michael said softly. "Thanks to some miracle or coincidence or fate, I don't even know what to call it." Jennifer offered a hesitant smile. "Maybe it's just justice. Late, but justice." She hesitated before continuing. "Michael, I want to apologize. For believing his lies about you, for letting him keep Emily away from her father." Michael shook his head. "There's nothing to forgive, Jennifer. You were a victim too." They stood there, side by side on the porch, gazing at the stars. Two people who had once shared dreams and were now bound again by love for their daughter and the determination to protect her. He rescued a girl on the highway and discovered she was his daughter, missing for 10 years. Michael Reynolds slammed on the brakes when he spotted a staggering figure on the shoulder of Interstate 95, cutting through the back roads of North Carolina. The orange hues of dusk made it hard to see clearly, but his 20 years of driving American highways told him something was wrong. His calloused hands gripped the wheel as the red Peterbilt, his faithful companion on so many lonely journeys, slowed with a long hiss of air brakes. This highway held many stories for Michael. It was where he'd started his career at 23, hauling freight from New York down south, navigating the treacherous curves of the Blue Ridge Mountains, battling thick fog, and discovering the freedom only a trucker knows. It was also the same road where, years ago, he'd last driven with his little girl in the passenger seat, heading toward a weekend that would be the unannounced end of his family life. When he jumped down from the truck cab, he saw it was a young woman, no older than 18. Her clothes were dirty, her hair tangled, and her hollow gaze sent a chill through him. She wore a faded t-shirt, torn jeans, and dusty sneakers. Michael approached carefully, not wanting to scare her further, feeling the still warm asphalt under his worn boots. The air smelled of damp earth and gasoline. That's when he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. A small crescent-shaped birthmark on the girl's right temple, identical to his daughter Emily's, the daughter he hadn't seen in 10 years, since the painful divorce that tore their family apart. That mark, a legacy from her maternal grandmother, was like a family signature imprinted on their skin from generation to generation. The young woman looked up, confused and frightened. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, exactly like Jennifer's, his ex-wife. Michael felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. I don't know where I am," she murmured, hugging herself. "I don't remember how I ended up here." Michael offered her his jacket to shield her from the cold wind that had begun to blow as night fell. It was an old denim jacket with a wool lining, worn by time but still sturdy, much like its owner. As he draped it over her, he studied every detail of her face, older now yet bearing such familiar features. The same shape of the eyes, the same slightly upturned nose, the thin lips that twitched nervously. It was like looking at a ghost, a grown-up version of the little girl he'd once carried on his shoulders and sung lullabies to. "What's your name?" he asked, dreading the answer, his voice rough with emotion. The girl hesitated, as if digging through the depths of her mind for a basic fact that should have been right there. Her slender hands clutched the borrowed jacket tightly, trembling fingers betraying her nerves. "I think my name is Kelly," she answered, but her tone was uncertain. "Kelly, just Kelly. I don't remember my last name." Michael felt a pang, though of disappointment, yet something about this girl still stirred painful memories. For years he'd dreamed of reuniting with his daughter, imagining her at different stages of life, trying to picture her face, her voice, her tastes. And now, standing before him, was this young woman who looked so much like the image he'd built in his mind, yet there was no recognition in her eyes. "I'll take you to the nearest hospital. It's about 40 kilometers from here, in Charleston," he said, gently guiding her to the truck. The cab of the Peterbilt was a home on wheels for Michael, clean and organized, with small touches that revealed the driver's personality. An image of the Virgin Mary pinned to the dashboard, a small pot with a hardy cactus that survived the long hauls, a picture frame holding a faded old photo of a 5-year-old girl smiling in a park. The girl paused for a moment in front of that photo, a crease of concentration forming between her brows, as if something was struggling to surface from the depths of her memory. During the drive, Michael stole glances at the young woman curled up in the passenger seat. She seemed to have fallen into a restless sleep, murmuring disjointed words. At one point she clearly said, "Dad," and Michael felt a lump form in his throat. The road, usually his ally and confidant, felt endlessly long that night. Every mile was an exercise in self-control to resist the flood of questions in his mind. It was too much of a coincidence. The identical birthmark, the right age, something in her gaze that screamed familiarity. But how could he explain her disappearance? Why didn't she recognize him? What had happened to his daughter in the 10 years since he'd last seen her? The small town of Charleston was bathed in yellow light when they finally arrived. The narrow streets of the historic district, with its colonial mansions and tree-lined squares, contrasted with the bustling port that made the city a key commercial hub. Michael knew that place well. It was where he had chosen to live after the divorce, seeking to rebuild himself far from New York, where the memories suffocated him, yet still connected to the routes he traveled as a truck driver. Charleston Memorial Hospital was quiet that Wednesday night. The pale green walls and well-lit corridors created a less oppressive atmosphere than most hospitals. Nurse Betty, a gray-haired woman who had worked there for over 30 years, was the one who greeted them in the emergency room. Her face, marked with expression lines, carried the kindness characteristic of those who had chosen a life dedicated to care. "What happened to the girl?" she asked, already guiding the young woman to a stretcher, her precise movements revealing decades of experience. "I found her on the side of the road, disoriented. She doesn't know how she got there," explained Michael, feeling exhaustion finally catch up to him after the tension of the encounter. "Are you related to her?" The simple question caught him off guard. Michael hesitated, the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain his suspicion without sounding crazy? How could he say that this lost girl on the road might be the daughter he hadn't seen in a decade? I don't know. She reminds me of someone," Michael confessed, feeling foolish for even considering such an absurd possibility. "My daughter, whom I haven't seen in a long time. It's a strange coincidence." Nurse Betty studied him for a moment, her experienced eyes seeming to see beyond his words. "In my experience, Mr. Michael, coincidences like that are rarely just coincidences, especially when they involve a father's heart." Her words echoed in Michael's mind as he waited in the lobby. The place was nearly empty at that hour, just an elderly man dozing in a chair in the corner and a young mother rocking a baby. The familiar sounds of a nighttime hospital, the quiet ringing of the nursing station phone, hurried footsteps in the hallways, the occasional beep of equipment, created a strange symphony that only made the situation feel more surreal. The on-duty doctor, Dr. Robert, a young man with glasses and a serious expression, examined the girl carefully. Fresh out of medical school just 4 years prior, he still carried the idealism and dedication often lost over time in an overburdened healthcare system. When he stepped out of the exam room to speak with Michael, his expression was thoughtful. "She shows no signs of physical trauma, but she's clearly in shock. We'll run some tests and keep her under observation. You said you found her on the highway. That needs to be reported to the authorities." Michael nodded, but something troubled him. If this really was his Emily, how could he explain it? His ex-wife, Jennifer, had moved to Texas with their daughter after the divorce, claiming she wanted distance from him and everything that reminded her of their failed marriage. In the early years, he had still managed to visit Emily a few times, but then Jennifer remarried, and the visits became fewer and farther between until they stopped altogether. "Doctor," Michael began hesitantly, If I tell you something that sounds unlikely, will you at least consider it? The young doctor adjusted his glasses, curious. Of course, Mr. Reynolds. What is it? This girl has a birthmark identical to my daughter's. Same age, similar features. I know it sounds crazy, but Dr. Robert studied him for a moment before responding. In medicine, we're taught not to dismiss possibilities, no matter how unlikely they seem, especially in neurological cases, where memory and identity are at play. He paused, considering. A simple DNA test could answer your question, but it would take time. For now, let's focus on her physical and mental recovery. While the doctor filled out the medical chart, the girl opened her eyes and fixed them on Michael through the slightly ajar door of the exam room. For a moment, her gaze seemed to clear, like clouds dispersing after a storm. "Your name is Michael Reynolds, isn't it?" she asked suddenly, with a clarity that contrasted with her earlier confusion. The truck driver felt his blood run cold. "How do you know that?" Before she could answer, her eyes closed again and she seemed to fall asleep. Dr. Robert looked at Michael curiously. "Do you know each other?" I don't know," Michael admitted, running his hand through the gray hair at his temples. "Doctor, this is going to sound crazy, but this girl looks just like my daughter, who I haven't seen in 10 years. She even has the same birthmark." The doctor studied him with a mix of skepticism and compassion. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you contact your ex-wife to check if your daughter is all right. In the meantime, we'll take care of the girl and try to identify her." Michael nodded, but deep down, he already knew the truth. That was Emily, his daughter. How she had ended up on that highway, why she was disoriented and why she hadn't fully recognized him, were mysteries he was determined to solve. In the hospital waiting room, Michael pulled his phone from his pocket and after 10 years of no contact, searched for Jennifer's number in his contacts. Surprisingly, the number was still there. His heart pounding, he pressed the call button. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered. "Hello?" Michael hesitated, immediately recognizing his ex-wife's voice. "Jennifer, it's Michael." The silence on the other end was heavy, almost palpable. "What do you want after all this time?" Her voice sounded defensive. "I need to ask you something important. Is Emily with you?" Another silence, this one longer, and filled with a different kind of tension. "Why are you asking that now?" Jennifer's voice trembled slightly. "Please, just answer. Is Emily with you?" A muffled sob came through the line. "No, Michael. Emily. Emily disappeared 2 months. Ergo, I've been desperate, searching for her. The police, they say she probably ran away, that it's common for teenagers. But I know that's not true. My daughter wouldn't do that." Michael felt the world spin around him. He braced himself against the wall to keep from falling. "Jennifer, I think I've found our daughter." In the 24 hours that followed, Charleston Memorial Hospital became the epicenter of a reunion no one could have predicted. Jennifer arrived at dawn after driving all night from Austin. Time had been kind to her. At 42, she still carried the elegant posture and determined gaze Michael remembered well, though a few premature gray streaks in her brown hair and fine lines around her eyes hinted at the passing years and perhaps the worries. When their eyes met for the first time in a decade in the sterile hospital hallway, it was as if time had both stopped and sped up. A whirlwind of memories, their first meeting at university in New York, the rushed marriage in their 20s, Emily's birth after a difficult pregnancy, the growing fights about his absence on the road, the painful separation, all compressed into that brief moment of mutual recognition. "Michael," she said simply, her voice deeper than he remembered. "Jennifer," he replied, surprised by his own calm. "Thank you for coming so quickly." An awkward silence followed. 2 people who had once shared everything, now almost strangers, bound only by concern for their shared daughter. "Where is she?" Jennifer finally asked, her voice betraying her anxiety. Michael led her to the room where the young woman was being treated. When Jennifer entered and saw the girl asleep on the hospital bed, her scream, mixed with sobs, confirmed what Michael already knew in his heart. That was Emily Reynolds, his missing daughter. "My daughter!" Jennifer exclaimed, rushing to the bedside and taking the young woman's hands in hers. "My Emily!" The girl's eyes slowly opened, confused at first, but then a spark of recognition lit up her face. "Mom," she whispered, the word leaving her lips as if testing its sound and meaning. Jennifer hugged her, openly crying now, murmuring disjointed words of relief and love. Michael stood by the door, feeling both a part of and separate from the scene, until Emily looked up over her mother's shoulder and saw him. "Dad?" she called, reaching a trembling hand toward him. That simple word, so natural for many but one he hadn't heard directed at him in a decade, shattered the last barriers of his restraint. Michael moved to the bed, clasping his daughter's outstretched hand, and the three remained like that for a long moment, physically connected after years of separation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. The doctors explained that Emily was suffering from dissociative amnesia, a psychological condition usually triggered by intense trauma. She remembered fragments of her life, but couldn't piece them into a coherent narrative. She instinctively recognized her parents, but couldn't explain how she had ended up on that highway or what had happened during the 2 months she'd been missing. "Think of memory like a puzzle that's been dropped on the floor," explained Dr. Sarah, the psychiatrist called in to evaluate the case. A black woman in her 40s, she had a calming presence and a rare ability to explain complex concepts in an accessible way. In cases of trauma, some pieces are temporarily hidden by the mind as a protective mechanism. Others remain visible, but without clear connections. It's as if the brain is trying to shield the person from memories that would be too painful to process all at once. The doctor adjusted her notes while observing the parents' reactions. "She needs time and psychological support," she continued. "Her memory may return gradually or all at once, but pushing her could do harm. For now, the most important thing is that she feels safe and supported." Michael and Jennifer exchanged uneasy glances. The idea that their daughter had endured something so traumatic that her mind needed to protect itself was heartbreaking. "What can we do to help?" Jennifer asked, her voice thick with restrained emotion. "Creating a stable, welcoming environment is essential," Dr. Sarah replied. "She needs to reconnect with her identity and life story at her own pace. Old photos, familiar objects, shared stories, all of that can help, as long as it's presented without pressure." Michael and Jennifer agreed to work together, despite their decade-long estrangement. The extraordinary situation demanded they set aside old grudges and resentments. On the doctor's recommendation, they decided to take Emily to Michael's home in Charleston, as it was advised against moving her to a completely unfamiliar environment like Jennifer's apartment in Austin. "Oh, you can stay in the guest room," Michael offered his ex-wife in a silent truce born of concern for their daughter. "It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and comfortable." Jennifer hesitated only a moment before accepting. Her expression revealed the strangeness of the situation, being under the same roof as her ex-husband after so many years, but also the determination of a mother willing to make any sacrifice for her child's well-being. Michael's house was simple, but cozy. A small two-story in a quiet neighborhood, with a backyard where he grew a few plants during the rare moments he wasn't on the road. The place reflected his personality, practical, without unnecessary luxuries, but with small touches that revealed a man more complex than his rugged appearance suggested. A bookshelf filled with volumes on American history and classic literature. A guitar in the corner of the living room he rarely played but couldn't bring himself to part with. Framed, photographs of landscapes captured during his travels across the country. Jennifer observed, surprised, how everything was tidy and clean, a significant change from the messy man she'd once known. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, mingling with the gentle aroma of wood and old books. It was undeniably a masculine space, but welcoming in its own way. "You've changed," she remarked as Michael showed her the guest room. He shrugged, embarrassed by the comment. 10 years is enough time for anyone to change. You're different too." A silence heavy with unspoken words hung between them, broken only when Emily appeared in the doorway, watching them with curiosity. There was something different in her gaze now, less confusion, more awareness. "You two look so strange together," she said with a bluntness that caught them off guard. like actors trying to remember lines from a play they didn't rehearse enough. Michael and Jennifer exchanged surprised glances at her sharp observation. Emily had always been a sensitive, observant child, but hearing such insight from the young woman she'd become was unsettling. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Jennifer replied softly. "It's been a long time since we've been together like this." Emily, however, seemed oddly familiar with the space, even though she'd never been there before. On the first night, she walked straight to the bookshelf in the living room and pulled out a worn copy of The Little Prince. Her fingers traced the faded cover with a familiarity that couldn't be explained just by the book's popularity. "You used to read this to me at bedtime," she said, looking at Michael with eyes that seemed to glimpse a distant past. "You did different voices for each character. The fox was my favorite." Michael felt tears welling up. It was true. That was exactly what he'd done when Emily was just 5, long before the divorce. He'd always put extra care into the fox's voice, making it wise and kind. And that specific copy with its yellowed pages and the handwritten inscription on the first page, "For my little star explorer," had traveled with him down every highway, a tangible connection to the daughter he'd missed. Jennifer knew about that book, of course. She'd given it to Michael on their first wedding anniversary, long before Emily was born. Seeing it there, preserved so carefully, and witnessing this moment between father and daughter stirred conflicting emotions in her. There was regret for lost chances, but also a pang of something like jealousy. As if during all those years she'd raised Emily alone, Michael had maintained a bond with their daughter that she didn't share. In the days that followed, more memories began to surface, but the biggest piece of the puzzle was still missing. What had happened in the last 2 months? Dr. Sarah came daily for therapy sessions, trying to help Emily recover her memories without pushing too hard. The sessions usually took place on the back porch, where Michael's small garden created a peaceful atmosphere. The doctor used various techniques, from traditional talk therapy to drawing exercises and free writing, searching for pathways to unlock the blocked memories. It was during one of these sessions, while absent-mindedly drawing repetitive patterns on a notepad, that Emily made her first significant revelation. "I remember a man," she said suddenly, her hand freezing on the paper. The expression on her face changed, as if a cloud had passed over the sun. "He said he would help me find my father." Jennifer and Michael, who were discreetly watching from the kitchen, exchanged worried glances. Dr. Sarah, maintaining her professional composure, gently encouraged Emily to continue without pressuring her. "What man, sweetheart?" asked Jennifer, trying not to show her alarm as she slowly moved closer to avoid disrupting the delicate moment. Emily furrowed her brow, gripping the pencil so tightly between her fingers that Michael feared it might snap. Her breathing became quicker and shallower. "I can't see his face clearly," Emily replied, her forehead creased in concentration. "But he knew my name. He knew I wanted to find my father." The psychiatrist gave a subtle signal for the parents not to intervene further. This was a fragile thread of memory, and any pressure might cause Emily to withdraw again. "It's okay, Emily," the doctor said in a calm voice. "You're safe here. We can come back to this when you're ready." Later, after Emily had gone to rest, Dr. Sarah spoke with Michael and Jennifer in the living room. "This is the first concrete memory from the time of her disappearance," she explained. "It's a good sign that it's starting to surface, but we need to be patient. Pushing too hard could do more harm than good." "But what if this man is dangerous?" Jennifer asked, the anxiety clear in her voice. "What if he tries to find her again?" The doctor weighed her words before responding. "That's a valid concern. I suggest you report this new information to the authorities, but without creating an atmosphere of fear around Emily. She needs to feel safe to continue processing her memories." As the days passed, the dynamic among the three began to shift. Michael and Jennifer, who had sworn never to speak to each other again after their bitter divorce, now found themselves forced to cooperate. The old resentments were still there, like furniture covered in a room no one visited, but their shared concern for their daughter created new common ground. Jennifer began to notice small details about Michael that had escaped her when she was the resentful young wife she'd once been. The patience with which he made breakfast for everyone, always remembering she preferred lighter toast. The kindness he showed Whiskers, the stray cat he'd adopted after finding her abandoned at a gas station. The way he could make Emily smile, with stories of his travels, never mentioning the pain of their separation. "I haven't taken you to see a comedy in ages," Emily suddenly exclaimed during dinner about a week after her arrival, making Michael drop his fork in surprise. "You remember that?" he asked, careful not to sound too eager. Emily nodded, a hesitant smile playing on her lips. "It was my 8th birthday. Mom had a migraine, and you took me to see that movie about the dancing penguins. We bought sweet popcorn and soda, even though we knew Mom wouldn't approve. It was our secret." Michael and Jennifer locked eyes, astonished. It was a real, detailed memory from a time before the father had completely vanished from their daughter's life. The memories continued to return in small flashes, like scattered puzzle pieces, slowly forming a picture. Emily remembered her school in Austin, her friends, a dog named Max that belonged to a neighbor, her favorite color over the years, which had changed from pink to purple and then to blue. These memories were comforting and helped rebuild her identity, but there was still a distressing void about the recent months. One night, while Emily slept, the two of them met on the house's porch, both sleepless and troubled by similar thoughts. The night air was fresh, carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby coast. The sky, dotted with stars, seemed to watch them in their uneasy silence. It was Jennifer who finally broke the silence, the question escaping as if it had been held back for years. "Why did you never try to see Emily again?" she asked suddenly, her voice a mix of accusation and genuine curiosity. The brown eyes Michael once found so expressive now studied him with an intensity that made him look away. Michael looked at her, surprised by the direct question. He felt a pang of initial irritation. How could she ask that after everything she'd done to keep him away? But something in the genuine confusion in her eyes made him reconsider. "Try. Jennifer, you changed your number, you moved. The last 3 times I came to visit, your husband said you'd gone away. After that, all my letters came back. What did you expect me to do?" It was Jennifer's turn to look surprised. Her eyebrows furrowed in an expression of confusion. Michael knew well, the same one she wore when trying to solve a particularly difficult problem back in college. "What are you talking about? I never got any letters from you, and Emily always asked about you. Richard said he reached out, but you were always too busy with work to see her." The name hung between them like a storm cloud. Richard Morgan was Jennifer's second husband. A real estate businessman Michael had never really gotten to know. He only knew the man was financially comfortable and, apparently, gave Jennifer and Emily the stability he, as a truck driver, could never provide. "I'm telling the truth, Jennifer. I never got any contact from you. I thought you were keeping me away on purpose." A heavy silence settled between them as they each digested this new and unsettling information. The creak of the rocking chair where Jennifer sat marked time like a metronome, while Michael remained still, leaning against the porch railing. "Richard and I separated 6 months ago," Jennifer finally said, looking not at Michael, but at the garden covered in night shadows. "He was furious when I said I wanted to move back to North Carolina. It was shortly after that Emily disappeared." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a disturbing picture. "Do you think he had something to do with her disappearance?" Jennifer shook her head, but doubt lingered in her eyes, now glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know what to think anymore. I thought I knew him, but if he lied about you all these years..." Her voice faltered. Michael resisted the urge to step closer and comfort her, an intimacy he no longer had the right to. Instead, he gave her the space to process the terrible possibility before them, that the man she'd shared a decade of her life with might have deliberately manipulated her relationship with their daughter, and possibly something even worse. The next morning, during breakfast, Emily had another flash of memory. The kitchen was sunny, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and cheese bread Michael had learned to make during his lonely years. Emily was recounting a confusing dream she'd had when she suddenly stopped, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "The dog," she said suddenly, dropping her spoon into the cereal bowl, the metallic sound echoing in the sudden silence. Buster. I remembered Buster. Michael and Jennifer exchanged a shocked look. Buster was the name of the dog they had when Emily was little, years before the divorce. He was a caramel-colored mutt they'd adopted when Emily was just 3 years old and had passed away when she was 5, hit by a car in front of the house where they lived in New York. The dog's death had been little Emily's first encounter with loss, an experience that had deeply marked her. How did you remember that just now? Michael asked cautiously. Emily seemed just as surprised as they were by the sudden memory. I don't know. I was thinking about the dream, and suddenly, I saw Buster running in the backyard of the old house. I remembered how he used to sleep under my bed and was afraid of thunder. There was no way anyone could have told her about this recently. It was a genuine memory from her childhood, buried for years, and now resurfacing on its own. Yes, sweetheart, Jennifer said emotionally, holding Emily's hand across the table. Buster was our little dog. You were still very young. He slept under my bed, Emily continued, her eyes glistening with tears. And he was afraid of thunder. He would shake all over when it started raining hard. Michael moved closer and took his daughter's other hand. That's right. And you used to sing to him when he was scared. Do you remember which song? Emily closed her eyes, concentrating. And then, to everyone's surprise, she began humming a childlike version of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the same song Michael had taught her to comfort the frightened dog. You taught me that song, she said, opening her eyes and looking straight at her father. You said it was the song your mother sang when you were scared. Michael nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. His mother, a simple woman from rural Kentucky, had indeed sung that song to him during the storms of his childhood. It was a connection across generations that he had passed on, and that his daughter, despite everything, had preserved. Emily smiled, a real smile that lit up her face for the first time since Michael had found her on the highway. It was like glimpsing the sun after a long season of rain. But the peace of that moment was shattered by the shrill ring of the doorbell. The sudden sound made Emily jump, knocking over her juice glass. The calm expression vanished from her face, replaced by an instinctive fear that Michael found disproportionate to a simple doorbell. It's all right, honey, Jennifer said, helping to clean up the spilled juice. It's probably just the mailman or a neighbor. Michael went to answer and found 2 police officers standing on the doorstep. The older one, a man with a weathered face and tired eyes who introduced himself as Detective Johnson, had the tense posture of someone expecting trouble. The younger officer, who barely looked old enough to have graduated from the academy, kept his hand subtly near his holster, a gesture Michael didn't miss. Mr. Michael Reynolds, the older officer asked, his tone formal but laced with authority. Yes, that's me, Michael replied, feeling a tightness in his chest, that gut instinct of looming danger that had saved his life more than once on the country's treacherous roads. We received a report about a young woman you might be keeping. In your home. We need to verify. Before Michael could respond, Jennifer appeared beside him, standing tall with her chin slightly raised in the same determined expression he remembered from their time together when she faced injustice. I'm her mother. My daughter is here. Because we're taking care of her after she was found disoriented. The younger officer glanced at a paper in his hand, frowned, then leaned in to whisper something to Detective Johnson, who momentarily looked taken aback. Ma'am, we have a police report filed by Mr. Richard Morgan, alleging that Mr. Michael Reynolds kidnapped his stepdaughter and is holding both her and you against your will. The shock on Jennifer's face was genuine. This is absurd. I'm here, of my own free will, taking care of my daughter. The officers seemed uncomfortable, but insisted on entering to assess the situation. They found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, still holding a cereal spoon suspended in mid-air, her expression turning to panic at the sight of the uniforms. No! She suddenly screamed, standing up and knocking over her chair. I won't go back. You can't make me go back. Her reaction was so visceral that even the officers stepped back. Dr. Sarah, who had arrived for the daily session and witnessed the scene, quickly intervened. Gentlemen, I'm Dr. Sarah Williams, the psychiatrist overseeing this young woman's treatment. She's under my care after being found in a state of shock. I'll have to ask you to leave. This situation is clearly causing her significant distress." Detective Johnson hesitated, glancing from Emily to the doctor. "Doctor, we have a formal complaint." "And I have a fragile patient," the doctor replied firmly. "If necessary, I can provide full medical documentation and make myself available for formal statements, but not here and not now." After some negotiation, the officers agreed to leave but made it clear the matter wasn't over. As soon as they were gone, Emily collapsed into a fit of sobs. "He's going to find me," she cried, trembling uncontrollably. "He said if I told anyone, both of you would suffer." Michael and Jennifer moved closer to their daughter, trying to comfort her while Dr. Sarah watched carefully. "Who, Emily?" Michael asked gently. "Who said that?" Between sobs, Emily finally revealed, "Richard. My stepfather. He's the one who took me." The confession unlocked Emily's memories. With Dr. Sarah's help, she began piecing together the events of the last 2 months. Richard had convinced her to get into his car after school, claiming her mother had been in an accident and was at the hospital. Instead, he took her to a remote house in the mountainous region of Texas, where he kept her isolated. "He told me Mum knew everything, that she'd agreed to keep me away from my real father because you were dangerous," Emily said, looking at Michael with tear-filled eyes. "But I never believed it. Something always felt off about his stories." According to Emily, she had managed to escape when the guard Richard had posted at the house got distracted. She hitched rides with various truckers, always hiding, until she found herself alone on that highway where Michael found her. "But why would he do this?" Jennifer asked, horrified by the revelation. "Why separate you from me and your father?" Emily lowered her eyes. "He said I was the only thing keeping you two apart, that if I disappeared, you'd eventually turn to each other for comfort. And he'd get everything. The house, the business. He was in financial trouble, Mom. I heard him on the phone multiple times talking about debts, about people coming after him. The story was so outrageous that if not for Emily's condition and the strange events of the past few days, it would have been hard to believe. But the pieces were falling into place. Richard's lies about Michael over the years, the convenient separation months before Emily's disappearance, and now the false kidnapping report. "We need to go to the police," Michael said firmly. "We can't let him get away with this." Jennifer nodded, but her face was tense. "Richard has connections in the police, Michael. I don't know if they'll believe us." "Then let's gather evidence," he said thoughtfully. "Emily, can you remember where that house was? Any details, anything that might help us locate it?" The young woman closed her eyes, concentrating. "It was near a town called Asheville. The house was at the end of a dirt road with a wooden gate at the entrance. There was a lake nearby. I could see it from the window of the room where he kept me." This information was a start. Michael, who knew the southern roads well, had a rough idea of the area, but they needed more if they wanted to convince the authorities. "We have to document everything," suggested Dr. Sarah. "I'll prepare a detailed report on Emily's psychological state and the consistent accounts she's been providing. That's already a beginning." That night, while Emily finally slept a little more peacefully thanks to a mild sedative prescribed by the doctor, Michael and Jennifer sat at the kitchen table, planning their next steps. "I never thought we'd be in this situation," Jennifer remarked, running her hand through her brown hair, now streaked with gray. "Fighting together after all this time." Michael watched her, seeing for the first time in years not the ex-wife who had hurt him, but the woman with whom he had shared years of his life and raised a wonderful daughter. "Things shouldn't have ended the way they did between us," he said softly. "I think we both made mistakes." Jennifer nodded, looking down at the cup of tea in her hands. "We were too young, Michael. We married at 20, had Emily right after. I wanted stability. You loved the road. Neither of us was willing to bend." "And Richard? How did he come into your life?" Jennifer took a deep breath. "He showed up when I was at my most vulnerable. I had just moved to Austin, was alone with a young daughter trying to rebuild my life. Richard was charming, attentive, seemed to have everything under control, I didn't realize until much later that control was what he valued most, over everything and everyone around him. Jennifer's account of her marriage to Richard painted the picture of a man obsessed with control who had gradually isolated her from friends and family. When she finally decided to leave, he had turned her departure into a cruel negotiation, using legal tactics to drag out the process and wear her down emotionally. Now, I understand why he might have seen Emily's disappearance as a solution, Michael said, feeling a chill. If the two of you were vulnerable and separated, it would be easier to manipulate the situation. The next day brought an unexpected complication. Detective Johnson returned, this time accompanied not only by the younger officer, but also by a man in a well-tailored suit whom Michael immediately recognized as the kind of expensive lawyer ordinary people like him could never afford. "Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Morgan," the detective said with forced formality. "This is Dr. William Blackwell, legal representative of Mr. Richard Morgan. He has requested to be present during the statement we've come to collect." Michael felt his blood boil, but Jennifer placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to stay calm. "I have nothing to hide," she said firmly, "but my daughter is under medical care and won't be exposed to any more stress." The lawyer smiled condescendingly. "We understand the delicacy of the situation, ma'am. However, my client is deeply concerned about his stepdaughter's well-being and believes she may be unduly influenced by—" He glanced at Michael with disdain. "Her biological father, who, I must remind you, was absent from her life for a decade." Michael stepped forward, but again Jennifer held him back. "Dr. Blackwell, I'd like to know exactly what legal authority your client believes he has over my daughter. As far as I know, custody is exclusively mine, as determined in our recent divorce." The lawyer cleared his throat, slightly uncomfortable. "Technically, you are correct. However, my client has shared in raising the young girl for years and has legitimate concerns. Additionally, there's the matter of the police report filed, alleging possible coercion or psychological manipulation by Mr. Reynolds." It was at this moment that Dr. Sarah, who had been observing the scene from the kitchen, decided to intervene. "Gentlemen, as the professional responsible for Emily's psychological treatment, I must inform you that she exhibits clear symptoms of post-traumatic stress related to recent events. During treatment, extremely concerning revelations emerged about Mr. Morgan's conduct." The lawyer narrowed his eyes. "What kind of revelations, doctor?" "Revelations that have already been documented and formally submitted to the district attorney's office," the doctor replied with deliberate calm. "As a healthcare professional, I have a legal obligation to report potential abuse of minors. This information caught everyone by surprise, including Michael and Jennifer, who hadn't known the doctor had taken this step." Detective Johnson seemed genuinely troubled. "Doctor, if there are allegations of this nature, we need to formalize them immediately." "As I said, Detective, I've already taken the appropriate legal steps," Dr. Sarah interrupted, "and I suggest you verify whether the police report mentioned by the lawyer was filed under questionable circumstances, given what we now know." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. The situation remained tense for several more days. Richard Morgan, through his lawyer, tried to maintain pressure, but the formal complaint filed by Dr. Sarah had changed the game. The district attorney's office took over the case, assigning a prosecutor specializing in children's and adolescent rights, DA Catherine Peterson, to oversee it. After hearing Emily's full account, the prosecutor requested an in-depth investigation into Richard. What they uncovered was alarming. Beyond the financial troubles Emily had mentioned, there were a series of buried complaints against him for questionable practices in his real estate business. Even more disturbing, this wasn't the first time. Richard had been accused of controlling and abusive behavior. His first wife had filed and later withdrawn similar complaints years earlier. For Michael, who watched everything with a mix of relief and frustration, the authorities' change in attitude was welcome, but it had taken far too long. "Why didn't anyone listen to these women before?" he asked DA Peterson during a meeting in her office. "Why did it have to come to this?" The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, sighed. Unfortunately, Mr. Reynolds, our system still fails to adequately protect victims of psychological abuse and coercion. People like Richard Morgan are skilled at manipulating not only their victims, but also the legal system in their favor. As the investigations continued, Emily's recovery progressed gradually. With therapeutic help, she began processing not only the trauma of the kidnapping, but also the years of subtle psychological manipulation she had endured from her stepfather. Even more painful was confronting the lies he had told about her biological father. "He always said you had abandoned us," she told Michael during a walk in the garden, "that you chose the road over us." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "There wasn't a single day I didn't think about you, sweetheart. I tried everything to stay in touch." "I know that now," Emily said, squeezing her father's hand. "I think I always knew deep down. That's why I kept that photo of us hidden." She was referring to an old photo Michael had found among the belongings Emily was carrying when he found her. A small, crumpled and faded picture showing Michael holding Emily, then 5 years old, in a park. "You've always been my hero, Dad," she continued, tears in her eyes. "Even when I believed you had left us, I imagined you driving down distant roads, living adventures, and I dreamed that one day you'd come back for me." As father and daughter rebuilt their relationship, Jennifer was facing her own demons. The guilt for allowing Richard into their lives, for not seeing the signs of manipulation, consumed her. Dr. Sarah, noticing this, suggested she also attend therapy sessions. "You're not responsible for his behavior, Jennifer," the doctor insisted. "People like Richard are experts at spotting vulnerabilities and exploiting good intentions." Slowly, the family began to heal. Michael, who had always lived at the fast pace of the open road, decided to cut back on his trips to be more present for his daughter's recovery. He rented a warehouse near their home and started planning the auto repair shop he'd always dreamed of opening. Jennifer, in turn, decided to stay in Charleston for the time being. She found a temporary job as a teacher at a local school, using the education degree she had abandoned years earlier to follow Richard to Austin. The constant presence of both of them, now working as a team despite their complicated past, was crucial to Emily's recovery. In Dr. Sarah's words, she was rebuilding not just her memory but her identity. Yet Richard's shadow still loomed over them. Even with the ongoing investigation and the restraining orders issued by the court, Michael couldn't shake his worry. The man had resources and influence, and people like him rarely accepted defeat easily. His fears proved justified one Sunday afternoon, 3 months after Emily's rescue. The family had decided to have a picnic in Charleston's Central Park, enjoying the mild autumn weather. They were sitting under a large tree when Michael noticed a man watching them from a distance. "Let's go," he said abruptly, starting to gather their things. Jennifer, sensing his tension, followed his gaze. "Is that him?" she asked, paling. Michael nodded. He had never met Richard in person, but he recognized him from photos he'd seen during the legal proceedings. The tall, well-dressed man observing them with a calculating stare could only be Jennifer's ex-husband. Before they could finish packing, Richard began to approach. Instinctively, Michael stepped between him and his family. "Stay back," he warned, his voice low but firm. Richard smiled, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. What a touching scene. The family reunited after all these years. "I must say, you've surprised me. I didn't expect my plan to work." "Out so well?" Jennifer stood, pulling Emily behind her. "What are you talking about, Richard?" The man shrugged, keeping his unsettling grin. "Well, darling, I really needed to get rid of you and that ungrateful girl. Business wasn't going well, as you must know by now, and the divorce was becoming costly. But watching you now, I realize it might have been a mistake. You all look so happy together. Almost makes me feel guilty." Michael felt his blood boil. The man in front of him spoke as if discussing the weather, not confessing to ruining lives. "You're being recorded, Morgan," Michael said, subtly gesturing to the phone in his shirt pocket, which he had started recording as soon as he spotted the man. "Every word." Richard's smile wavered for a moment, but quickly returned. "Record? All you want, Reynolds. It'll be your word against mine. A trucker with a history of abandoning his family versus a respected businessman. Who do you think they'll believe? It was Emily who stepped forward, surprising everyone. They'll believe me, she said with a firmness Michael had never seen before. And the other women you manipulated and controlled. We know about your first wife, Richard, and the other complaints. This time you won't silence anyone. Richard's face drained of color. For a moment, Michael feared he might do something desperate right there in the park. But then he noticed they were no longer alone. DA Catherine, the prosecutor, was approaching with 2 police officers. Mr. Morgan, she called in an authoritative voice, I believe you're violating a restraining order. That, combined with the new evidence that's come to light, compels me to request your arrest. What followed was a blur for Michael. Richard tried to flee, was restrained, shouted threats. But unlike in the past, this time his words fell on ears no longer willing to believe his manipulations. Later at the police station, DA Catherine explained they'd been monitoring Richard for days, suspecting he'd try to make contact. Michael's recording would be another piece of evidence in the growing case against the businessman. You were all very brave today, the prosecutor said, looking especially at Emily. Your testimony is crucial, but I understand how difficult this must be. The young woman nodded, holding her parents' hands. I just want this to be over so we can move forward. And slowly, that's exactly what began to happen. With Richard in custody facing multiple charges, the family could finally breathe without fear. In the weeks that followed, Michael finalized the purchase of the warehouse and began transforming it into a workshop. To his surprise, Emily showed a genuine interest in working with engines, revealing a skill he never imagined his daughter had. Guess it's in the blood, she joked as she helped her father dismantle an engine. I've always liked tinkering with things and figuring out how they work. Jennifer, watching the 2 work together, couldn't help but notice how alike they were in many ways, not just the distinctive birthmark, but in their gestures, determination, and how they faced challenges. She too was rebuilding her life. The school where she'd been working temporarily offered her a permanent position, recognizing her talent as an educator. For the first time in many years, she felt truly independent. The relationship between the 3 wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, painful memories that occasionally surfaced, adjustments to be made. Michael and Jennifer didn't become a couple again. The fundamental differences that had separated them still existed, but they found a new kind of partnership based on their shared love for their daughter and the mutual respect that had been rekindled between them. 6. Months after the encounter on the highway, Reynolds and Daughter officially opened. Michael had insisted on including Emily in the business name, recognizing not just her mechanical talent, but her right to build something that would be part of her future. At the opening, a small gathering brought together friends and new contacts they'd made in Charleston. Dr. Sarah was there, as was DA Catherine and even Detective Johnson, who'd ended up becoming an ally after realizing how he'd been manipulated initially. In a quiet moment, as Michael watched Emily proudly showing the workshop to some guests, he found himself standing beside Jennifer. Did you ever imagine we'd end up like this? She asked with a small smile. Michael shook his head. Never. But I'm grateful for where we are now, despite everything we went through to get here. Jennifer nodded, following his gaze to their daughter. She's amazing, isn't she? After all she's been through, she can still smile like that. She has your strength, Michael replied. And your stubbornness, Jennifer shot back, making them both laugh. Emily approached just then, curious about what had her parents laughing together. What's so funny? Michael wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders. We were talking about how you managed to inherit the best and worst of both of us. Emily smiled, hugging them. I got lucky. Even when I was lost, I think I always knew I'd find my way back to you. That night, after the party, Michael stood alone on the porch, gazing at the stars. He thought about the strange path life had laid out for him. For years, he believed his greatest joy was on the open road, driving with no set destination. Now he understood his true destiny had always been this, finding his daughter on that deserted highway under the orange glow of dusk. Richard Morgan's trial took place nearly a year after Emily's rescue. The businessman, who had always built his image on appearances, saw his true nature exposed. Past victims of his manipulations, encouraged by Emily's example, came forward. Employees revealed questionable practices. Documents he thought he'd destroyed resurfaced. For Emily, testifying was one of the hardest moments in her recovery. Being in the same room as the man who had manipulated her for years and then kidnapped her required a courage she didn't know she had. "I'm proud of you," Michael said, hugging her after her testimony. "More than I can say." When the sentence was finally handed down, sentencing Richard to several years in prison, there was no celebration on their part, just quiet relief, the closing of a painful chapter and the freedom to truly move forward. The repair shop thrived. Michael discovered that the knowledge he'd gained from years on the road gave him a unique advantage. He understood truckers' problems like no one else. Soon, Reynolds and daughter became a must-stop for haulers passing through the area. Emily, now 18, decided to take a technical course in mechanics to complement the hands-on knowledge she gained daily from her father. Her trauma hadn't completely vanished. There were still nights she woke up frightened, moments she felt vulnerable for no clear reason. But she had learned to manage those feelings with ongoing therapy. Jennifer found her own path. Her experience as a teacher rekindled her passion for education, and she began specializing in working with at-risk children. In a way, it was her way of turning her suffering into something positive. Michael, Jennifer, and Emily didn't live under the same roof again, but they built a family dynamic that worked for them. Weekly dinners, celebrating important dates, supporting each other through hardships. A family pieced back together in a way none of them could have predicted. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, almost 2 years after their reunion on the highway, Michael and Emily were driving home after helping a trucker they knew who'd broken down a few miles ahead on Interstate 95. "Dad?" Emily said suddenly, watching the sunset paint the sky orange through the window just like that day. "Do you believe in fate?" Michael thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know if it's fate, sweetheart, but I believe some people are connected in a way neither time nor distance can completely break." Emily smiled, thoughtful. "You know what I think is the most amazing part? That you found me exactly at that point on the road. You could have passed by 5 minutes, earlier or later, but I didn't," Michael interrupted softly. "I was exactly where I needed to be at the exact moment." They finished the rest of the journey in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived home, they found Jennifer waiting on the porch with a surprise. She had received an offer to develop an educational program for at-risk youth and wanted to share the news with them first. As they celebrated together, Michael looked at his gathered family and thought about how life could change completely in an instant. In the decision to brake the truck upon seeing a figure by the roadside, in recognizing a familiar birthmark, in the courage to face the past, to build a different future. Some wounds never fully heal, he reflected, but it's possible to build a beautiful life even with the scars. And on the interstate not too far away, other travelers continued on their journeys, unaware of the extraordinary reunion story that had begun on that same pavement, under the same orange-hued twilight sky. The end of the story. Dear listener, did this uplifting story touch your heart? Tell us where you're watching from and what you thought of this emotional reunion. Does destiny always lead us where we need to be? Leave your like and subscribe for more heartwarming tales.